It was a cold, snowy Christmas Eve. The small town of Aspen lay buried under a thick, relentless blanket of snow, and the Henderson family's wooden cabin stood quietly at the edge of whispering pines. The faint glow of Christmas lights reflected off the snow outside, casting a cozy but isolated glow in the storm. Inside the cabin, the air was warm and filled with the comforting aroma of Clara's freshly baked cookies mingling with the sharp, clean scent of pine from their Christmas tree. It was the kind of evening that felt magical, until everything went dark. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died completely, plunging the room into an eerie silence. "Dad, what happened?" Emily, the eldest at 12, asked, her voice tinged with worry as she held her younger sister Sophie's hand tightly. Sophie, only 6, clutched her stuffed reindeer and looked up at her mother with wide, questioning eyes. Jack, the head of the family and a carpenter by trade, grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer. Its dim beam barely pierced the darkness, casting long shadows that danced across the wooden walls. Their golden retriever, Max, lifted his head from his spot near the fireplace, his ears pricked and tail wagging uncertainly. "It's probably the storm," Jack said, trying to sound calm. "I'll check the breaker." As Jack disappeared down into the basement, the family huddled together near the now dark fireplace. Clara tried to soothe the children, her voice soft but strained. Outside, the wind howled like a wild beast, rattling the windows and carrying faint, almost human-like whispers. The sound seemed to creep into the house, making Clara glance over her shoulder more than once. Then came a loud thud from outside, as though something heavy had fallen against the cabin. Max growled low, his hackles rising as he turned toward the front door. The sound of crunching footsteps in the snow followed, slow and deliberate, moving toward the house. "Did you hear that?" Noah, 9 years old and braver than most his age, asked in a whisper. His eyes darted toward the frosted window. Clara nodded, her heart pounding. "Stay here," she said, rising slowly. She approached the window, her breath fogging up the glass as she tried to peer into the storm. The snowfall was so dense that it was impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. But she felt it, that unnerving sensation of being watched. Then came the knock. 3 slow, deliberate raps on the front door. The sound echoed through the silent cabin, freezing Clara in place. "Jack?" she called out, her voice trembling. But there was no response from the basement. "Mom, who's at the door?" Sophie asked innocently, her tiny fingers gripping Clara's sweater. I don't know, sweetheart." Clara swallowed hard, her throat dry. She glanced at Max, who was now standing, his teeth bared, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest. Summoning what courage she could, Clara moved toward the door. "Who's there?" she called out. Silence. The door creaked slightly, as though something, or someone, was pressing against it from the outside. Clara backed away, her pulse quickening. Suddenly, the floorboards above them groaned. Before she could process the sound, Jack emerged from the basement, his face pale. "The breaker's fine," he said, his voice strained. "This blackout isn't just us. It's the whole area." Clara started to speak when the fireplace roared back to life, the flames springing up as if by some unseen force. The sudden light threw grotesque shadows across the room, and the family froze as they saw it, a figure standing just outside the window. Dressed in a torn and filthy Santa costume, the figure stood perfectly still, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. The snow fell around it, but it didn't seem to move or even breathe. Slowly, it raised a gloved hand and waved, the gesture chillingly slow and deliberate. "No. This can't be," Jack muttered under his breath, stepping protectively in front of his family. Clara grabbed his arm, her voice trembling. "What is it, Jack? What's going on?" Jack swallowed hard, his eyes never leaving the figure at the window. Years ago, there was a man who used to dress as Santa. He'd go from house to house, bringing gifts to children in the area. But one Christmas, during a storm just like this, he got lost in the woods. No one knew he was out there, and he froze to death. Clara gasped, holding Sophie and Emily closer. Jack continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "They say his spirit wanders every Christmas Eve, searching for the family who ignored his cries for help that night." The family huddled closer as Max barked furiously at the window. The figure outside didn't flinch, its hollow eyes locked on the cabin. Then, with a sudden, sharp crack, the sound of splintering wood echoed from the back of the house. "Something's inside," Noah whispered, clutching Clara's arm. Jack grabbed a fire poker from the hearth, his knuckles white as he gripped it tightly. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice firm despite the fear etched across his face. The cabin had grown colder, the warmth of the fire doing little to keep the chill at bay. Clara glanced around, her breath visible in the icy air. The storm outside raged on, but the whispers had grown louder, and now they seemed to be coming from inside the house. The room fell deathly silent, save for the crackling fire. Then, a sound, a faint jingle of bells, began. Soft at first, but it quickly grew louder, more menacing. The chimes echoed through the cabin, sending chills crawling up their spines. Jack's hands trembled as he scrambled to barricade the door, dragging furniture in a desperate attempt to seal the entrance. "Clara, take the kids upstairs," he barked, his voice full of urgency and fear. Clara grabbed Emily, Noah, Sophie, and Max, pulling them toward the stairs. The air upstairs was cold and heavy, thick with dread. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, distorting the house into a living nightmare. She shoved the children into the bedroom, locking them in the closet as Max whimpered, pressing against Sophie for comfort. "Mom," Emily whispered, her voice trembling, "he's not going to stop, is he?" Clara pulled her close, trying to steady her own breath, but the words barely left her lips. "Your dad will protect us. We just need to stay quiet." Downstairs, Jack was barely holding it together. The eerie sound of bells was now joined by heavy, deliberate footsteps. His grip tightened on the fire poker, the only weapon he could find. The front door suddenly slammed against its frame with bone-rattling force, splintering beneath an unseen pressure. "Show yourself!" Jack yelled, his voice cracking. The fire flared suddenly, casting blinding shadows. When Jack turned, the figure was there, standing mere feet away, its hollow, empty eyes staring directly into his soul. The tattered Santa suit hung loosely from its skeletal frame, and its grin was unnatural, stretching far too wide, exposing jagged blackened teeth. "You think you can protect them?" the figure rasped, its voice like ice scraping against stone. "Family, so fragile, so precious, but you took it for granted." Jack swung the fire poker, but it passed through the figure, dissipating into a cloud of dark smoke that swirled and reappeared behind him. Upstairs, the children flinched as a loud crash echoed through the cabin, followed by the sound of breaking glass. The closet door rattled violently as Sophie began to cry. Clara quickly pressed her hand over her mouth, her own pulse thundering in her ears. The door creaked open, and to Clara's relief, it was Jack, pale, out of breath, his face stricken with terror. "We have to leave," he whispered hoarsely. "Now." But Clara hesitated. "Jack, what's happening?" "He's inside," Jack's voice trembled. "He's in the house." Suddenly, the hallway lights flickered on and off, casting long, ominous shadows. The sound of the bells rang again, accompanied by a deep, guttural laugh that seemed to come from nowhere. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. "No more games," the voice boomed from every corner of the house. "You can't run. You can't hide." The family bolted downstairs, Max barking furiously, but when they reached the door, it wouldn't open. No matter how hard Jack pulled, it remained locked, as though held shut by an invisible force. A freezing wind howled through the house, extinguishing the fire, plunging them into darkness. The ghostly figure emerged from the shadows, its hollow eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "You had everything," it whispered, its voice dripping with malice. "But you didn't appreciate it." Jack stepped forward, brandishing the fire poker as a weapon. "Leave my family alone," he shouted. The figure tilted its head, its grin widening unnaturally. "I'm not here to take them. I'm here to show you what it feels like to lose them." The walls of the cabin seemed to twist and warp as though the house itself was collapsing. The family screamed as they were torn apart by the shifting walls, each one falling victim to the ghost's wrath. Jack was the first to go. His scream was cut short as the ghost lunged at him, its icy hands wrapping around his throat. Then Emily, Sophie, and Max, each one taken by the spirit in turn, their desperate cries echoing through the cabin, swallowed by the winds. And then, Noah. Alone. The last one standing. As the ghost turned its cold, lifeless gaze toward him, Noah's heart nearly stopped. Its grin stretched impossibly wide. "You were always the weak one. You'll be the last." Noah opened his mouth to scream, but just as the ghost reached for him, the world around him began to fade. Noah shot up in his bed, gasping for air. His room was quiet, the warm glow of Christmas lights casting a soft, comforting light. It had been a nightmare, a terrifying dream that felt all too real. Downstairs, the sound of laughter and the smell of pancakes filled the air. For a moment, Noah remained frozen, the ghost's chilling words echoing in his mind, "Cherish them, or this will be your reality." Tears welled up in his eyes as he remembered how distant he had been from his family. Without thinking, he rushed downstairs, throwing his arms around his parents and siblings. "I love you," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry." Clara, startled, hugged him tightly. "We love you too, sweetheart. Are you okay?" Noah nodded, but deep down, he knew he had been given a second chance, a haunting lesson learned from the Christmas Eve nightmare that would stay with him forever. From that day on, he would cherish his family, not just on holidays, but every single day. As the haunting lesson of that Christmas Eve lingers in Noah's heart, one thing is clear: cherish your loved ones, for you never know what tomorrow may bring. If you enjoyed this spine-chilling tale, don't forget to give us a thumbs up and share it with someone who loves a good scare. For more terrifying stories and mysteries, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. And remember, stay close to the ones you love, because the darkness is always waiting. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next haunting hour.